Bruchem Aboy, M'Shem Egen Shirtzar, Rakum Adon Terei Sheikh, from Rabbi Zev Smith on Minyan Manoigim, the Minyan with Sumsum, a small Minyan. Smith, please.
I recently saw the following stories. People waiting for a minyan for mincha, and a person walked in. Okay, no, Ashrei, Ashrei. So they said, "There's no minyan." He goes, "What's the minyan? Look, there's 6 people davening and there's 4 people learning." He goes, "But where's the minyan?" Well, Shishim Espalim is good enough. So the truth is, start getting a little lebedik. Is it true you could daven with 6 people davening and 4 people learning? But the truth is, this question is really negaya also to Meir, when you just have a smaller minyan and you don't even have 10 people. It's negaya to Shachris when you want to start Shmei Nesra and a few people are still davening Birchas Krishma. You don't have 10 people starting Shmei Nesra. It's negaya to Kaddish, as we'll soon see. It's negaya to a tzibur of 10 or more that a few people are saying Kaddish, a base oval that you have 6 people saying Kaddish, only 4 people answering. So it's negaya to Tefillah B'tzibah, Chazar Sashatz, Ma'ariv, and Kaddish. And really the question is, whenever you need a minyan, do you have to have a minyan mamish? Is 6 enough? Do we go rubai kakulai? And as you'll see, there are many nafkaminas lahalacha. So the truth is, the source of the concept of a minyan, that's the Gemara, the Mishnah Megillah Daf Chaf Aleph from Adbeis. The Mishnah has a list of things that you don't say it unless you have a sorah, unless you have a minyan. The Gemara explains, we learned the concept of minyan from the pasuk, V'nigdashti b'soich b'nei Yisrael, kol davar shebekadusha, la'yia pachas mi'asar. Minimum for davar shebekadusha, you need 10 people. And this is quoted in Shulchan Aruch and Siman Nun Hey Sif Aleph. You don't say Kaddish or any davar shebekadusha with less than 10 people. In fact, some say that this chiyuv of a minyan is a deraisa. The minimum amount of 10 for Kaddish Kedusha laning is a deraisa. Okay, most paiskim believe it's only derabbanan, it's an asmachta. But one thing is clear: a minyan must be had not one less than a minyan. So now the question is, where do you get this shishim mispalim? If you have to have a minyan, you should have to have 10. So the truth is, what people say is rubai kakulai, which happens to be a Gemara in Hayriyas, Daf Gimel Amud Beis, B'chol Torah Kula, Kaimalon Rubai Kakulai. So if the minyan is 10, so 6 is enough. So maybe it makes sense. You don't need 10, you need 6. And the truth is, we find this in very serious context, Rubai Kakulai. Just to give you one example for now, the Mishnah Chulun Daf Chav Zayin speaks about shechting. You have to shech both simonim, but it's only roiv. If you shech roiv of the simonim, it's also enough. So there we have it. Maybe this concept of Rubai Kakuli applies to a minyan. You need 10 people to daven the mincha, true. But if you have 6 people davening and 4 people just sitting there, Rubai Kakuli. But the truth is, it's very hard to accept. Because if so, is it enough to eat roiv of a kazayis? Doesn't make sense. I'll give you a better marshal. Let's say you work hard 1 week and your boss pays you and your check is missing most of your payment. A big part of it. So you say, what's going on here? You may have to pay me $1,000. The check's made out to $501. He says, don't you know Rubai Kakulai? He's not a lamdan, he's a ganif. Yeah, right? So why by minyan is Rubai Kakulai good enough? So I'll tell you when Rubai Kakulai works. The Mishnah in Sanhedrin, Daf Lamed Beis, says to have a bezdin of din and nefashos, you have to have 23 dayanim. Now, it doesn't mean 23 dayanim have to say chayiv. As long as you have 2 more saying chayiv than potter, in other words, if you have 13 said chayiv and 10 said potter, you give a yid misa. That's the lumdis of Rubai Kakulai. Out of 23, 13 is enough. But la yala ala das, that you look around and Bezdin, a big part of the Bezdin didn't show up. Now how many you have? Oh, 13? Okay, let's start. Rubai Kakulai. What's the chiluk? Very pashut. You have to have a number. You can't trim the number and Rubai Kakulai. You have to have a kazayis. You can't say roiv kazayis. Imagine a person has a tiny kais. What's this? Rubai Kakulai. You don't say Ruba Kekula by shiurim, by numbers. If you need a number, you need a number. So why should we even think Ruba Kekula works? So what's interesting, there's a Rambam in beginning of Perik Ches of Hilchos Tefillah, where the Rambam says, precious word that we have to hear from time to time. Tefillah Siba Nishmas Tamid. And even if you have people that do Averis, if you have a tzibur, the Rebbeinu Shalom listens to the tefillah. Lefichach tzarich adam mishatev atzmim atzibur. You have to daven with a minyan. Lo yispalel yichidi kozman sheyachol yispalel b'tzibur. The Rambam stells back the halach of tefillah b'tzibur. Now it's interesting. The Rambam seems to be repetitive. The Rambam says you have to daven with a minyan and don't daven b'yechidus. So I think the Rambam is really a source of Rav Moshe's important chiddush. Rav Moshe has the Shaila in Chelik Bey, Siman Chav Zayin, and again in Chelik Gimel, Siman Zayin, where someone asked him, he likes to learn late at night, and he misses Tefillah B'tzibur. Is it all right to miss Tefillah B'tzibur because you're learning late at night? So Rav Moshe says, you have to realize you can't be mezalzel on Tefillah B'tzibur. Tefillah B'tzibur is a chi of Dr. Moshe. It's not just a plus and a mile what it is, but it's a tremendous schus. And Moshe says a very strong argument that when possible, it's almost also to daven b'yechidus. And listen to his cheshbon. We find it's Taisis and Brachos Daf Yud Zayin, and the Shulchan Aruch and Siman Ayin Siv Gimel, and the Ramah and Kuf Aleph Siv Aleph quote this, that today, Laida, we don't have proper kavanah. No one should get insulted. Taisis says it, and the Shulchan Aruch says it in two places. That today we don't have proper kavanah. So Moshe asked the obvious question. If we could assume that we're not going to have the right kavanah for davening, so what's the head to start davening? A person knows before he starts davening he's not going to have kavanah, so what's the head to the davening? The tefillah won't be niskabel. The teretz is we have one great defender, and that's called tefillah b'tzibur. Because Keil Kabe v'lo yimas, Ein HaKadosh Baruch Hu moyes b'tiloshin sorabim, our tefillah, no matter what it is, goes up with a tzibur. But Dr. Moshe, to daven b'yechidus, you almost are certain they won't be niskabel. Now, of course, if someone, like Elena, was sick, he has to daven b'yechidus, okay, he has no choice. But when a person has the opportunity to daven b'tzibur, it's almost also to daven b'yechidus. And Moshe Grada says, you tell me you want to learn, I also learn. But I find time to davening, like what's your problem? Why is it a stira? Learning and davening, not a stira. But the point that Moshe says is, it's almost also to daven b'yechidus when you have a minyan available. And I see that in the Lashon of the Rambam. He says, you're supposed to daven with the tzibur, v'lo yispalo yechidi. It's almost like there's an issa to daven b'yechidus if the minyan is available. But be that as it may, this Rambam tells us the chiyuv of tefillah b'tzibur. Look at halacha daled. Keitzat tefillah tzibur. What's tefillah tzibur? So the Rambam describes our davening, our chazar sashatz. The shatz davens and people listen. And then the Rambam says, and I quote, Afilu hoyu miksasan kvar ispaldu. Let's say you have exactly a minyan, and a few of them already davened. You're allowed to make chazar sashatz. V'shiyeh roiv hasara lo yispalalu. As long as you have the roiv are davening now and didn't yet daven, so if you have 6 davening, you could make tefillah b'tzibur l'chayr. Zok the Kesef Mishnah. Do you see what the Rambam is saying? In regard to tefillah b'tzibur, shisha mispalim is enough. And he points to Masechta Seifim, the end of Perik Yud, which is based on a pasuk in Tanakh, regarding Kaddish and Baruch Hu. Some say 7 is enough, and some say even 6 is enough. Because Rubai Kekula, we'll soon see why the number 7. It's based on a pasuk. But we definitely see from a Rambam, and the Kesef Mishnah highlights this, that regarding Tefillah B'tzibur, Rubai Kekula. And that's why the Minchas Yitzchak Chelik Tesim and Vav points out that indeed there is a source from Rambam that Rubai Kekula works. So the people that said, let's start davening, we have 6 people davening, they're based on a Rambam. The only question is, why does it work? No one eats 51% of Kazayis matzah and thinks he's yoitza. So why should tefillah be different? and that kasha is stronger than we think, because there's a Tshuvas Halachos Ketanis in Chelik Beis Nun Gimel. Mamish asks the question that we have to answer. When sometimes we say Ruba Kekula regarding Shchita, Rav Simanim, but most halachas you need a shear. You don't say Ruba Kekula. And he says, you're right. When you need a shear or a number or a weight, you don't suffice with Ruba Kekula. Imagine you walk into a mikveh one morning and it's mamish very little water. So you ask the shamash, what's going on here? He goes, well, we have Roiv Mem Sa and just go. So you're going to go, taka, but not go to the mikveh. Roiv Mem Sa, it's ridiculous. A drop is missing, you can't toivel in it. So his yisoid is that when you need a shear, a number, amount, you don't say Ruba Kekula. But obviously, regarding Shechita, if you shecht Rav Simanim, so the animal is considered dead regarding Shechita. He doesn't speak about Tefillah B'tziba. But the Heilige Chassam Sofer and Tshuva and Archaim Siman Kuf Mem also discusses Ruba Kekula, and it's a little more custom-made for us. And the put in the Chassam Sofer's Lashon, we don't say Ruba Kekula ela mitoich kulei. And listen to his brilliant mashal. He says a bezdin lamashal of Chav Gimel, and 13 say the man is chayiv, so he gets visa. But Zok Chassam Sofer, if just 13 show up, you can't paskin Ruba Kekula. You have to have the amount, 23. From 23, Rubai mikulei. Not kukulei, rubai mikulei. Start with 23, and then 13 say chayiv. It's good enough. But you can't trim a number and say rubai kukulei. And listen to his mashal. One of his mashalim. You need 10 people for davar shebekadusha. No one's going to say as long as you have 7 people we could start because rubai kukulei. That's for shalom. So the Chassam Sofer already says when you need a minyan, a number, an amount, we don't say rubai kukulei. And the Chassam Sofer says the same is true. You can't toivel in a mikveh that's missing a drop of memsa. But let's say you have a mikveh of memsa and some of the water is pasul, then we say bittul b'rayv because Ruba Kekula. So we're starting to see Ruba Kekula is not an easy pass to trim shiurim. But what's most custom made is the Rav Moshe in Chelik Aleph Siman Chav Ches. Someone asked Rav Moshe our very shayla. I heard that if you have 6 davenes is enough to make tefillah b'tziba, and Rav Moshe, that's not true. If you need 10 davenes for a minyan, you need 10 and not one less than 10. Because Ruba Kekula does not work with shiurim. And Rav Moshe does add, that's probably implicit in the Lashon HaGemara and Brachos, Davav, minayin asora shemispalim sheshchena yimayim shenemol ekim nitza badas keil. So Moshe says, basically, if you need a minyan of 10, you need 10 davenes. So whoever told you Shish Mespalim works is making a mistake. Sai from the Gemara Navav, and also in Svar. The only question is, what about the Rambam? Moshe did not forget the Rambam. So in that tshuva, Moshe explains, look again, you'll see Pshat in the Rambam. The Rambam starts off in Halacha Aleph with what's Tefillah B'tzibur. Halacha Dalet, he says, Tefillah B'tzibur, one form of Tefillah B'tzibur is Chazar Sashatz. Here's what the Rambam is saying. Let's say you had 6 people davening, and there was no minyan. They davened 6 people. Then they say, you know what, let's make Chazar Sashatz. We have 4 people that are willing to answer to Chazar Sashatz. So the Rambam, that's good enough. Because you have Roiv to B'chayev Chazar Sashatz. To be Yoysa Tefillah B'tzibur, you need 10 daveners. But to make Chazar Sashatz, if 6 people davened, that's enough to make Chazar Sashatz. And it's Meduik in the Lashon of the Rambam, Keitzat Tefillas B'tzibur, one person gets up and davens and might see them all. That's Chazar Sashatz, not Tefillah B'tzibur. So here we have a Rambam that Pashtus seems to say Ruba Kekula, but Rav Moshe, and we'll soon see many others learn, it's not a raya. But there's another L'chayra raya that even Ruba Kekula works, and that is a Magen Avram in Simon Samach Tes, the Mishnah Berurah and Sif Katan Ches quotes it. And I'll read the Lashon of Mishnah Berurah, who adds a very key few words. The Poskim are talking about when you have less than a minyan. So again, the Magen Avraham says that if you have 6 people that daven Shemona Esrei, Kashiyesh Roiv Minyan, Heim Kamoy Tzibur Gomor, they're like a Tzibur Gomor, 6 people, and you can make Chazaras Hashatz. So the Mishnah Berurah uses that word, 6 is a Roiv Tzibur Gomor, a complete Tzibur. So l'chayra, this is a raya to what we're looking for. That Rubik Akulai is considered Tefillah B'tzibur. But I'm sure you realize that it's not really a raya. Because the Magen Avraham and Mishnah Berurah are talking about make Chazaras Hashatz. So maybe the 6 people never didn't have Tefillah B'tzibur because there's no din of Rubik Akulai. But they can make Chazaras Hashatz, and we'll soon see why that's possible. And Taka Rav Moshe in that Shuvah says the Magen Avraham is not a raya. It's like the Rambam. It's saying Chazaras Hashatz, then 6 people is enough. But for minyan, you need 10 people davening. But before we apply this Lamaisa, we have to see one more Chayodam. The Chayodam in the beginning of Klal Yud Tes says a big aside. Graditz Kedai to mention because, like he says, it's a Toyes Gadol. There are some people that are Moisa Nefesh to daven with minyan, but they don't know the true definition of Tefillah B'tzibur. You see people come to daven with Mesiras Nefesh. But either they come a little late, or they daven slowly, or they take the time. The Kitzah, they answer Baruch Hu, and they answer Kedusha, but they end up davening Shemona Esrei after the tzibah finished. Because they like it their own pace, and especially if you come late, they have no choice. I made Baruch Hu, I said Kedusha, and you daven Shemona Esrei when the Olam is saying Ashiv Ol Tzion. So up to Chayodam, it's a terrible mistake. And listen to his Lashon, the Ikka Tefillah B'tzibur, Hu Tefillas Yud Ches, the real Tefillah B'tzibur is 10 people have to daven Shemona Esrei together. In other words, what he's saying is Baruch Hu and Kedusha and Leining is great milas in Tefillah B'tzibur. But the real Tefillah B'tzibur is you daven with the minyan so the Tefillah goes straight up and the Marshbaum accepts Tefillas Rabbah. That's the point of the Chayodam. But as our Moshe and many others point out, but look at the way he describes Tefillah B'tzibur. Sheyispalu 10 anashim gedolim biyachad. What's he saying? That we don't settle for Rubik Akul. You need 10 people davening Shemona Esrei. So now we have a Chayod that seems to say there's no din of Rubik Akul. However, it's not really so convincing because the Chayod's main point is that the Ikka is Shemona Esrei. So what should he say? 6 is enough. I mean, that's not typical. 10 people. But the way that I saw the base Baruch, that's Rabbi Zilba, his Pirish on the Chayodam, he says it's a pella, what people say in the name of the Chayodam that he never said. People say the Chayodam said you have to have 10 people. How the Lomdim put words in the mouth of the Chayodam? The Chayodam says 10 people. His point is not 10 versus 6. His point is that the Ikka of Tefillah B'tzibur is Shemona Esrei. Don't come late and catch Baruch Hu and catch Kedusha and hear laning and go home. I daven with a minyan. The Ikka is davening with the tzibur. Now, typically a tzibur is 10, but lav dafka 10. So Rav Moshe says it's a raya from the Chayodam. Rabbi Zilba says don't put words in the mouth of the Chayodam. So in Igros Moshe Simon Chav Test, the next tshuva, someone wrote to Rav Moshe, maybe it's not a raya from the Chayodam. Maybe the Chayodam just means to say that as long as you daven Shemona Esrei. So Moshe says, then why do you have to say this whole thing? The ik is to daven 10 together. He should have said, the ik Tefillah B'tzibur is Shemona Esrei. Simple. So this is the challenge of our original simple question. Does Rubik Akule work for Chazaras, for Tefillah B'tzibur? We have the following. The Pashas of the Rambam and the Magen Avraham was, Raiv is enough, but it's not a raya. The Pashas of the Chayodam is that you need 10. It's weiter not a raya. But let me tell you, one thing we have to clarify before we apply this Lamaisa, and that is, what's Taka the Svara of those that say and hold that Raiv is enough for Tefillah B'tzibur? If you have to have a Kazayas and you can't satisfy yourself with 51%, if you have to pay your worker 100%, why should tefillah b'tziba be enough 6? Why is it different than a revius? You can't have a rive revius in the kais. The teretz, I think, is pashut. The chiyuv is to have a minyan. That's a deraisa or the rabbanon, and that's non-negotiable. Now, once you have a minyan, so I'll say rubai mitoich kulai. I'm not going to say 6 people in shul is enough. Chas v'shalom. 10 people. I have 10 yidden. Now, once I have the number 10, I have a minyan. So, how much is tefillah b'tziba? Rubai mitoich kulai. And there's 2 dinim, minyan and tefillah b'tziba. Now, those that are machmir and say you have to have 10 daveners, they say there's no such spell. It's all the same. It's one and the same. A minyan of daveners. That's tefillah b'tziba. So this is basically the machlekes gedolei haposkim. Is Rubik Kulai valid regarding tefillah b'tzibur? Now, what is halacha l'maisa? So I'm not qualified to answer, but I'll tell you what I saw. A maracha, mul maracha. That's a Piskei Tshuvas and Simon Tzaddik. He's got me base the homework for us, and he has a long list of places that hold that Rubik Kulai works, and some that doesn't work. But the truth is, the Kesev Mishnah is from the earliest source that says Rubik Kulai works for tefillah b'tzibur. There's a Chuvas Yad Elyo, the regular Rav in Simon Zion. He says, Zebora b'li safik, that you have to have 10 people davening to make it tefillah b'tzibur. But it's interesting that most poskim seem to say Rubik Kulai works. Rab Chaim al Ashas in the Gila Simon Ayin, the Brisker Rav in Chuvas Hanagis Aleph Kov Beis, and the Chazinish in Das Noita Tefillah Ha'ora 40, and the stipend Erchas Rabbeinu, Aleph and Aleph, Abshem Zalman, Alicha Shloima, in the beginning of Perik Hay, all insist that you need 10 people davening. We don't say Rubik Kulai. But L'idach Gisa, and this is noteworthy, in the Piskei Tshuvas, he quotes close to more than a half a dozen Gedolei Poskim, the Chalkas Yaakov, the Kinyan Torah, B'tzei Alachacham, Beis Avi, Tilas David, the Minchas Yitzchak, all say that the minig always was to rely on Rubik Kulai. In other words, 6 daveners is enough. They all wonder why people are disturbing the peace. Now, this is interesting. I think I can understand why they're all saying that. Because the earlier poskim do acknowledge the Rubik Kulai works. Now, I'm not saying that the B'chayim and the Briskirov and Ramesh is disturbing the peace. But as the Minchas Yitzchak writes, in Chelik Testim and Vav, Shaga b'achraina, lately people started talking, maybe you have to have 10 daveners. But all those poskim, the Chalkas Yaakov, Kinyan Torah, B'tzei Alachachma, Beis Avi, all grew up in Europe, and they all say, I saw all over, in Litva, in Hungary, in Poland, that people were saying, Rubik Kulai. So, although mitzarecha, the taina, the how could 6 work, is a good taina, but it seemed that the minig was that the Welt relied on Rubik Kulai. Again, the Yad Elyo was the earlier place. He lived 150 years before Moshe was nifta. He was nifta. So you're talking about someone that lived 2 days ago. He's convinced that you don't see Rubik Kulai. But I think we could say that the minig always was to rely on Rubik Kulai for tefillah b'tzibur. I'll say let's follow the Mishnah Berurah, right? But that's hard because the Mishnah Berurah quotes the Magen Avram that 6 is a tzibur gomer. But he also quotes the Chayadam that the Ikat Tefillah B'tzibur is that having 10 people together. So back to our rayas that bring us in different directions. So what I think we could say is that basically the minig was to rely on Rubik Kulai, but there are Gedolei HaPoskim that insist unless you have 10 davening, b'shas ma'isa, that would not be Tefillah B'tzibur. But I also want to make another point. Even if you hold Rubik Kulai works, who said it's lechatchila? Just like we look forward to Pesach, that really, as the Shulchan Aruch and Taf Ayin Bey, Sif Tes writes, you have to have a revius. The Bach and the Mishnah Berurah Sif Kot and Lamed say the lechatchila is supposed to drink a revius. But the Eved, Roiv, works. So maybe, even if you hold Rubik Kulai works for Tefillah B'tzibur, maybe it's only B'di'evet. So I think we could say that halacha, the minig was to rely on Shisha V'Spalim for Tefillah B'tzibur. Some say you need 10, and even those that are Mekel, l'chayr, it's preferable to have 10 daveners to have a real tefillah b'tzibur. Now let's apply this l'maisa, and here's the question based that we began with. Someone walked into shul by mincha, and he got a hero's welcome. Okay, let's start Ashrei. He looks around, there's only 6 people with him, but they're davening, relying on Rubik Akulei. So again, it's not so pashit, but if they need him, he should daven with them, because this is the minig Yisrael of Rubik Akulei. The truth is that the poskim say that if you daven taka with such a minyan, shachris, so for us, you'll say, oh, daven, what do you have to lose? But you know, could be a very tricky question. In Eretz Yisrael, they duchen every morning by shachris. If it's not a real tefillah b'tzibur, then you can't duchen. Duchening is part of tefillah b'tzibur. And the poskim say when you have a minyan of Rubik Akuli regarding shachris, you're allowed to duchen. So that gives us some confidence that indeed a Rubik Akuli is a valid minyan if you did it certainly b'di'evet, and not only you could rely on it, but even the kakayin could duchen, or kahanim could duchen when you have this small minyan. The next question is, when you rely on Rubik Akulei, do you have to have 6 or 7? Now, the first person that gave me this question was the Chassam Sofer that I mentioned in Simon Kuf Mem, and he keeps on saying for Tefillah B'tzibur, 7 would be Rubik Akulei regarding Chazar Sashatz. Where did the number 7 come from? I'm not great in math, but I think 6 out of 10 is right? So, what comes to mind is brachis daf mem ches regarding zimun. That how many do you have to have that ate bread to make a zimun of asara? 7, ruba de minka. So the question is, does that apply to our tefillah b'tzibur? The answer is punkt fakert. If it's especially a din regarding zimun, so who said it applies to tefillah? But the emes is, besides the Chassam Sofer that mentioned 7, the Shibali al-Leket, one of the Gedolei Rishonim, and Simon Chav Zayin, he says, if you have 7 people that are davening, you're allowed to make Chazar Sashatz. And he says, Maduch benching, which is only 1 bracha, Zimun, 7's enough, you have to have 7, but Kolshkein, Chazar Sashatz, you have to have minimally 7. And the Radvaz in Chelik Daled, Elef Shin Yud Aleph, also says that those that say 7, it's Ruba de Minka, but he says, I'll explain why. If you have to have 7 people that are answering, so then, as the way the Lashon is, it has to be Nikah the Koil. And Nikah the Koil is only when you have 7, not 6. If you have to have numbers, so then 6 is enough. But if you have to have answers, like Chazar Sashatz, it has to be very nikah, and it's only when you have 7 aruba de minka. Ramaisa, he himself was makel on 6, but we do have a source of 7. I tell you where else I saw the number 7 as opposed to 6. The Shari Tshuva in Tav Kuf Samach Vav Sif Cotton Dalid has an interesting shayla. You have a minyan on the tainis, and not all the people are fasting. Can you daven vayachal and lein vayachal? You don't have a minyan of fasted. He says, as long as there are 7 people, a ruba de minka, that are fasting, you're allowed to lein vayachal. So you see, regarding a minyan for tainis, you need ruba de minka. And the Yonason Steif in his Tshuva Simirei Shayin Tes, he writes it very matter-of-factly, ha'olam nahagu lahada achashiva. Regarding tefillah b'tzibur ruba kakula works, you have to have 7, not 6. But I must tell you, I guess we could say, Poik Chazim Ayama Debar, when the Welt is makel on Ruba Kekulai, the number is 6. And I saw the B'Tzeil HaChochma and Chelik Dal Kuf Lamanei very respectfully says, maybe, I'm sure Be'en Steif was saying the truth, and where he lived, they needed 7, but where I lived, I lived in Europe, I lived in Eretz Yisrael, the Welt relies on 6 to be Ruba Kekulai. So this is basically the aside that if a person wants to rely on Ruba Kekulai, so you could even rely on 6, because that seems to be the Minika Island. Now, Lamaisa, if someone has only 6 people and they can wait till they get 10 daveners, Avad Tamayla. Don't forget that 10 is a minyan of days. But let's say a person's on a plane And some people don't want to daven now, and other people say, let's daven now or never. So I talk about the Shulchan Alevi in Perek Beis, Siman Ches, says even though Moshe holds it's not tefillah b'tzibur, but a shasat chak like this is this or nothing. Avad you can rely on Shisha Mispalim, Rubik Akula is enough. They asked the Sambas Chaim, Beis Chaim Zonefeld, and the Tshuva Siman Pei Hey, if, let's say you have a shul now and they're relying on Rubik Akula, should I daven with them, or I could travel and find a minyan, go to Shem Shabbos, Lamashal, and get a minyan of 10 daveners? He says definitely it's worth the extra effort. Because after all, some say it's not enough. But we can't be mezalzel minika oilam, the Welt is saimach on Rubik Akula. Challenging question. Same question, you walk into shul and you get a hero's welcome, you are number 6. And you're not interested in relying on Shishim Mispalim, and I'm leaving. They say, when you're leaving, we're not going to have a minyan. So it's 2 questions. If you already walked in and you're number 10 in their eyes, can you walk out? Or number 2, you're walking by and they call you Tzenta. So you ask them, Tzenta what? Tzenta person or davener? No, you're number 6. And you keep on walking. You walk by. So let me tell you that if you're in shul already and you're number 10, to walk out is not safe. Remember the Gemara in Brachis, it's a whole in Shulchan Aruch. Oiz ve'Hashem yichel, you can't ruin a minyan. So that l'chayr is pashut that if you're in shul already and you're number 10, by walking out you're going to ruin the minyan. So better be from and stay with them and don't ruin a minyan. You'll say ein oim mechatei b'shul sheyizke chaverecha chas t'shalom chatei. If minig Yisrael is Rubik Akula, you're not doing an avera and daven with them. But to me, what the chiddush was. Rabbi Shlomo Zalman Aleich Shlomo Perek Hey Siv Ches, he holds that Rubik Akula does not work with Tefillah B'tziba. He holds like Rav Moshe and the Yad Elio, you have to have 10 daveners. But yet, in the same shtickle, he says, if they need you to make up a minyan, then daven with them. And do the chesed and rely on Rubik Akula. He says, even if it happens a lot. Every other day you walk by the shul, they're very shvach attendance, and every other day they need you for a minyan. So he seems to say it's not a tefillah b'tzibur, but if they're doing it, stay with them. Tremendous mishkal hachasidus, from and krum is sometimes the invisible line, but he says it's a chumra midad machaveroi, and if they need you, join them. So what I think the point that you have to see is that insisting on asar mispalim is not a vilda chumra. But also true that relying on Shisha Mispalalim is not a Vilda Kula. It seems to be Minig Yisrael, and basically, when someone helps a minyan like that, he's not doing an Avera Chalila, he's just complying with Minig Ha'olam. And next question comes up all the time. Let's say you had a full minyan. Okay, 10 people davened, and believe it or not, they all started. But Lamaisa, it comes to Shemona Esra, you look around, one person's still in Krishma, and he's still saying, Bechas Krishma. Sternbuch in the Chuvas Chelik Aleph Simakuv Beis quotes what he heard from Rav Dessler, that in Kelm, they were so disciplined that they all started, they said Gal Yisrael together, and the whole minyan started Baruch Atah Hashem. But Lav Kol Adam Zeichen Lekach. You look around today, it's interesting what people are holding. Here's my question. You have a minyan of 10 or more even, but it comes to Shemona Esra and the Chaz looks around and he's basically all alone. He puts together 6 people. Could you start Shemona Esra or do you have to wait for Asar Mispalim? So Rabbi say this is mamish the same shayla. If you hold that for Shemona Esra you have to have 10 and we don't do B'Kekula like Rav Moshe, then you have to wait. It's not a half sick because it's Tzarech HaTfilah. Of course, don't be quick to say Gal Yisrael and then turn around. Give yourself some leeway, wait, and look around. But if you hold, like the minhag seems to be, that Rubik Akula works, so then you could start. Now, what should the Shliach Tzibur do? Typically, it makes sense that if he could wait, so wait. The problem is on a morning rush hour during davening, where the Chazan is not allowed to even sneeze, because that's very tircha the tzibura, but certainly to wait. So again, if the tzibur is moving and every day they have to be out by a certain time, he has all the right to say, let's start, as long as we have Shisha Mispalim. It's the same concept that Shisha Mispalim is considered a tefillah. Now, Lamaisa, Rav Sternbuch and Chayli Gimel, Simelam Gimel says a chiddush. Maybe this is better than a typical Shisha Mispalim. Because here the other four are davening with you. But one's holding by Krishma, and one's holding by Krishma, one's holding by Ezras. They're not just four people sitting in the back and answering. And that's me a big chiddush. What does that mean? Manashach, if you have to have a Sarah Mispalim, it's Shemon Esrei. But Lamaisa, without that svara, I think it's important to realize that a Chatchil is supposed to have 10 daveners, but if the people are behind and the people have to go, and again, there's Terech and Sibura, you could start with 6 Mispalim. Now, I just want to make a point and hope it reaches those that if they get it to. When you do daven with a minyan mitzumtzum, it's a responsibility, it's an achrayus. You have to make the minyan work. Now, some people typically daven in a small minyan, that's where it is, and it's pashut an avla bin ad mechaver. They either come late or daven slow or both, and every day they turn a minyan into a machlokes. Why? Because if you daven all 10 together, you can make tefillah b'tzibur l'chol hadayis and have a wonderful daven. But 1 or 2 people are davening slow and they didn't have kavanah. So you want to daven slow and have kavanah, go to a big minyan, gesundheit. But if you're part of a minyan and they need you, you're 1 of the 10, you have to keep up with the tzibur. If need be, even skip part of Sukkot de Zimra, but it's not right because of his hidur to make the entire minyan into a machlokes if it's tefillah b'tzibur or not. That's something that you have to realize is the responsibility of a person davens together with a minyan mitzumtzum. Next question, when do you start Chazar Hashatz? In other words, let's say they're all Kelamis and they all started Shemon Esrei on time. But some people are still down Shemon Esrei. So this we spoke about it before the last year. It was tape 1057. But to make a long story short, the Mechaben Kuf Chav Dalit, Siv Dalit says, for Chazar Hashatz, you have to have Tisha Shainim, 9 people listening and answering to the brachas. If not, it's a bracha, a karav liyais, birchaisav levatala. Chazar Hashatz is different than tefillah b'tzibur. You have to have 9 listening and answering. Now, this is based on a rush in the Chuvas Klal Dalet Siman Yotes, and the Sar is Pashit. Rabbi Yid, why are you saying Shemon Esrei? You just daven Shemon Esrei. Why are you repeating it? The teretz, what justified another Chazar Hashatz? Tisha Shaimim, Tisha Einim. If you don't have that, it's a bracha levatala. That's the shita of the Shulchan Aruch. And you know what that's like, Rabbi say? That's like kazayis of matzah. You need a kazayis, not roiv kazayis. And regarding Chazar Hashatz, you need Tisha, not roiv. Because the original takana of Chazar Hashatz was you need 9 people answering. So you can't chop a kazayis into 51%, and you can't chop Tisha Einin into 6. And that's why by Chazar Hashatz is the most chamor. Now, the question is, let's say you have a minyan mitzumtzum, and you have one fellow who's a slow moving vehicle, pardon me, and he takes forever. Can I recruit someone that already davened and say, you be the Tisha Einin, you answer? And the answer is, why not? He already davened, but then again, we all davened already. Teretz, you need 9 answers, so you can recruit 1 or 2 as many as you need until you get to Roy of the daven there. The big question is by Ma'ariv. And here's the question. You have a minyan mitzumtzum of 10 people, and you started on time, everything is doing great, but again, people are behind. So we would say, B'chayra say, Hashatz. You have to wait to say Kaddish until you have 9 people answering. But in Shulchan Aruch, the same Mechaber earlier in Siman Nun Hey Si Vav, he says, if Lamaisa, one person is still davening and he can't answer the Kaddish, or he's sleeping, you're allowed to start Kaddish. The Magen Avram says in Sivkot and Ches, as long as you have a minyan in the shul, you could say Kaddish. But wait, he quotes Maral Chaviv, that even if you have 3 or 4 davening Shemon Esrei, you could say Kaddish. Because you have a minyan, and you have Roiv that are answering. You hear that? And the obvious kasha is, but in Kuf Chav Dalid, Siv Dalid, you have to have 9, and here he says you only have to have 6. Right? 4 davening, 6 left. So there are a few terutzim. But I think what the Welt assumes that the halacha l'maisa teretz is based on the Rav in Nun Hey Zayin, where the Rav says the Chilik is Pashut. Regarding Kaddish, that's a regular Davash Kedusha. What's the minyan? 10. Now your question is, how many have to answer? No, that's the way we're going to say it. Rubai Mikula. You have a minyan, you have 10 bodies there, B'nai Yisrael. How many have to answer? Rive is enough. Like you have a revius of wine in the kais, you drink a revius, rive revius, you yaitza. Answering Kaddish is a regular din of Rubik Kulai. But Chazar Sashatz, the whole heter to repeat the Shemay Esra is if you have Tisha Einin, so we can't say right when you need 9. In other words, it's only Chazar Sashatz that you have to have Tisha Einin. Kaddish is not Chazar Sashatz. It's the regular din of a minyan. So make sure you have 10 people in the shul, and Shisha Einim would be enough. Actually, I should be more medayik. You don't have to have 6 answering. You have to have Roiv answering. So if the shots looks around and 5 finish Mein Esra, 5 are finished, 4 are still davening, so it's Shisha including the shots. So the shots is 1 and 5 finish Mein Esra, Allah he's allowed to say Kaddish even though 4 are still davening. So the chilik is Chazar Sashatz versus Kaddish after Ma'ariv. Now I should mention that the Mechaber does say that Allah in the same Siman Nun Hey that if possible the shot should wait till everybody finishes Shemay Esra so they could be Zoych and answering to Kaddish. Halavai you could do that and be Mazaka them, that's their rights. But if a shots realize people are rushing or Tircha Tzibura, that as long as he has 5 finishing and he's the 6th, that would be Roiv Rubik Kekula. So it comes out something very important to stress. There are really 3 levels in this sugya. Tefillah b'tzibur needs a minyan. Is Shisha Mispalalim considered a minyan? That's a Machlokes Gedolei HaPoskim. Chazar Sashatz, to start with Sashatz, you need Tisha Oinin, and that's the way it should be. Kind of some Makel, if one's missing, that's the Shita that the Yashin is good enough. But you're talking about Karvli as B'chaisel Batala, we try to have 9 Oinim. For Kaddish after Ma'ariv, that is enough. 5 finishing with the shots is 6. A really tough question, I hope it should not be Negeya, is let's say you have a minyan with something, everything's going great. The Oilim started together, they're saying Chazar shots, they're all answering. In the middle, someone has to go to the bathroom, pardon me. And he walks out, and you look around, and you're missing 9 people. You don't have a minyan even. So the MS is that will say you have to wait for 2 reasons. You don't have Tisha Ayin, you don't have a minyan. But there's halach in Siman Nun Hey, Siv Beis, and Siv Gimel, that if you started with a minyan and someone walked out of the middle, you're allowed to finish that thing. Now, this is a big sugya, we have to talk about it in the shir for itself, but this might qualify to be the psak in our case. He walked out, hopefully he's an aynis and he's not oiz Hashem yichlu. But right now, you look around, you only have 9 people and 8 aynim. But you have the halacha once you start a behet. Now, if you think it's the right thing to wait till he comes back, no, maybe it's, you can wait, but it's first not right for the tziba and not right for the person. It's very embarrassing. Everybody's waiting for him. So again, if it works out that you can wait for him, gesund to hate. But if not, if the shliach tzibah feels the oil is not going to be happy with him waiting, continue saying Chazar Sashatz. You rely on echad yatza. You have, as long as you started behet. What is a question we hear from time to time, people are learning in shul in late morning or early afternoon, and a few people come in and they want to daven. What time is it? Don't ask. They want to daven. Okay, how about sir? We need you. You have to answer to, we have 6 people davening and we want you to be part of our minyan. That's not right. Because this is my time for learning. Why should I stare because of, because you're a minyan? Now, you don't have a minyan. And looking at the time, it's something tzarachi and why people daven so late, way after this man tefillah. So that's not like the previous case where there's an established minyan and looking for a minyan. The point that I think is important, the Chuvas Maram Baruch in the Chadosh is Chelik Aleph Siman Reish Samaches. He has a fascinating shaila. There's just the minyan, and they're relying on a cotton as one of the minyan, which is a big machlokes, a poiskim and Siman Nun Hey. So he says you should walk out and don't be part in that avla. Forget about everything else. You can't partake in that avla. Now, if people are davening after chatzos and they want you to mitzvah to their minyan, that might qualify for this statement that you don't have to be part of that minyan when it's really connected halach. Now, lamaisa, another question that comes up, that when people could not put together a minyan, Pasha, they couldn't have a minyan, so they davened separately. And after they finished, they realized, hey, there's some people here. Maybe we could put together chazar sashatz. So we're going to say kedusha, kaddish. So this is what we mentioned earlier. This is Siman Samach Tes. And the Mishnah Berurah says, if you have 6 people that davened, now you could make a full-fledged chazar sashatz. The Magen Avram says, and Mishnah Berurah says that that's considered tziva gomor, and you could in fact say a regular chazar sashatz. I once heard this shaila. It's an interesting question. They had just this. They had 6 people davening, no minyan, no tefillah b'tziva, and then they wanted to make a chazar sashatz. The problem is one of the 6 admitted afterwards, after they started, that he's a cotton. He was wearing a hat, wearing tefillin, because he was 3 months before his mitzvah, whatever, a month before. Can you rely on 5 and a cotton? So the Radvaz in that Tshuva Chedal, it's in Elef Shin Yudal, has this very shaila, and he says, you know what, you could do it. Maybe rely on the cotton, and also some shita say one's enough for chazar sashatz. The Mechaber brings that shita. Mr. Berurah rejects it, but Lamais is a shita, one's enough. So once you have a cotton and 5 others, no, nishkefelach. Question: minyan mitzumtzum, okay? And here's the problem: about to start laning, and one of the people was David Shemon Esrei. I don't know where he was chazar sashatz, but here's the question: can you start laning when you have exactly 10 and one's davening Shemon Esrei? So you're wondering, what's the shaila? There's no din of Tisha Einin. But here we come to a bigger side. Because the Pashtis, as we saw from the Gemara, the Mishnah and Megillah, you need 10 people for laning. Why do you need 10 people for laning? So Pashit, Ein Davish V'Lisha Pachas Mi'asar. That's the Pashtis. But the Ran on that Gemara, and I quote, Ein Korim B'Torah V'Ein Maftir Menavi Pachas Mi'asara, V'Akanta D'Rabbanan Hu V'Loi Tikun Ela B'Tzibura. You need a minyan for laning. It's a special takanas chachamim. Zok Prima Godim in Siman Nun Hey Sivkot and Ches and Eishel Avram. What's the naftamid of these 2 reasons? Either Davish Kedusha or takanas chachamim. Zok Prima Godim Again Shavart. Let's say one of the 10 is not listening to laning. Either he's learning, stam, or he's davening. If you hold Davish Kedusha needs 10, so you have Rubik Kulei. If you hold Zakanas Chacham, you have to have 10 people for laning and listening, then you have to have 10 people. You don't say Rubik Kulei by a number. He's understanding l'chayra that if a number 10 to listening. And that's why the Bialach in Kuf Mem Vav discusses this very question, and he says, like this Prima God, that it's possible that a minyan for laning is more chamer than anything, even chazar sashatz. It's a takanas chazal, you have to have 10 people listening to the entire chazar. And he said, I'll prove it to you. Because there is a sheet in Shulchan Aruch that if one person missed chazar sashatz, he could make paris al shema and make a new chazar sashatz. Okay, we hold 6. But no one says for people laning, one person missed laning can make laning. To make laning with the brachas, you have to have 10 people actively listening to the laning. So it comes out a davanifla that laning is more chama than even chazar sashatz, 10 people listening to the laning. Now, what's interesting is the chayodah in Klal Lamral of Sifir of Claire's. Let's say you only have roiv people, 6 people that want to make a laning. They have a minyan, but only 6 didn't hear laning. I'm not so sure of the chayodah that you can make a laning, because you have to have a minyan that didn't hear laning. The Aruch HaShulchan in Siman Samach Tes Yudalit says no. As long as you need 10 people, no suffix. If 10 people miss laning, you can make another laning. If just 7, you can make a laning. And listen to this chiddush. The Bialach and Kuf Mem Gimel says, as long as you have roiv minyan that did not hear laning, you could lane again. And I saw the Buchacha, Amar Sham, Karen LeDavid, Lev Chaim, the Har Tzvi, and Aleph and Dalet all say if 6 people miss laning, they landed in a flight and they want to make a laning, 6 is enough to make laning. And the Bialacha says this. So to me, at first, it was a clear. Bialacha says you have to have 10 listening. How does he have to? How do you say that 6 is enough? It's not a kash at all. You have to have 10 people listening. True. So you'll have 6 people didn't hear laning, 4 listeners, and you have a wonderful minyan. Then we'll say Rubik Kulev listeners. They're not laying yet. But if you have 10 people in the shul and 1 is not listening, that's much worse. Another minyan mitzumtzum that's I think a shtickle mitzvah lefarsim. The Magen Avraham and Simon Samach Tes Sifkat and Dalet says that after learning, or after Ashrei by Mincha, or after Kabbanis by Shachris, the minhag is to say Kaddish. Zogt the Magen Avraham, don't mistake and think that as long as you have 10 people by Kaddish, you could say Kaddish. Lamashal, you started Ashrei, there's no minyan, but you have B'tachim. There's 4 people. And you look around, Tilas, Baruch Hashem, God's Kaddish Mei Rabbah. So if the Magen Avraham wrong, in Simon Reish Lamadal, you have to have a minyan for Ashrei. In other words, not just a minyan for the Kaddish, but a minyan for what's Mechayev the Kaddish. And in this case, what's Mechayev the Kaddish? Ashrei, or Kabbanis in the morning, or learning with a minyan. The Magen Avraham Shita in Samach Tes Dal and Reish Lamadal and Aleph is, it's not enough to have a minyan for the Kaddish, you need a minyan for the Mechayev of the Kaddish. That's a problem, because in some shuls for Kabbanis, it's a no-show. I mean, they say Kaddish on the Kabbanis, in a different, like the whole Kabbanis is an old minig, or the Kabbanis became a carbon. You have to have a minyan. Now, Baruch Hashem for us, the Taz and Nun Hey Sifkat and Gimel says, I don't think that's true. He doesn't quote Magen Avraham, but he says, the ik is you have to have a minyan for the Kaddish. For the Chai of the Kaddish, Lav Dafka. So the Mr. Brura does say in Nun Hey Sifkat and Beis, he says, regarding the concept of Sukkah de Zimmer and Ma'ariv, could be the Magen Avraham is made that you don't need 10 people Shas Maisa. So it's very hard to know what to do Lamaisa, because the Mishnah Berurah does say the best thing should be if someone knows he doesn't have a minyan for Kaddish, or for Kabbanis, or Ashrei, to say 3 psukim after the minyan comes. So again, I want to be very clear that regarding learning, it's best to have 10 people, at least by Rav Chananya ben Akasha, by something to Mechayev the Kaddish. By Ashrei, if there was no minyan for Ashrei, I have a few people who came later, at least say 3 psukim. But Miyikid, then you could be Saimach on this Shita of the Taz. A thought-provoking question, I once thought about this. Like Lechem, you have a base oval, you could have 6 or 7 of the 10 saying Kaddish. What do? You don't have anybody answering, you have 2 people, 3 people answering. So here I saw the Rav Pa'olim in Chelik Bey, Simon Yudal has this Shaila, and he says, Nachmer, even if you have 10 Avelim in a minyan, and there's nobody else, they could all say Kaddish. I ve'imru amen. So he says, and how about when you say Shemay Esra 3 times a day, you end the Shemay Esra ve'imru amen. Who are you talking to? Terech, you're talking to the Malachim. So Kaddish also, ve'imru amen is going on the Malachim. And then he says, but by Kaddish could be, you don't have to come on to this. Because whoever's listening, maybe someone's walking by the base oval and he hears the Kaddish. But the Rav Pa'olim and the Chubas is convinced if you have 10 Avelim saying Kaddish, that's the entire minyan, a minyan mitzvah Avelim, they could all say Kaddish and no one answers. He says maybe, b'machshava I think of his Kaddish, maybe, but he holds 10 people Kaddish is fine. Now in his Sefer, Ben Ish Chai, Shana Aleph, Ayichit Hazayin, he modifies it somewhat. He says at least one person should be answering. No, the Kavachayim and Sivkot Lamed Aleph says, once you're modifying it, have 2 people answering. So the Imru, Amen, Lashon Rabim, Shtins. That's fine. But Miyikidin, 10 people saying Kaddish, no problem. Let me leave you with one more important halacha, and that is when you have 2 chiyuvim in a shul, should they divide the minyan to make 2 minyanim for 2 avelim? So the truth is that when you make 2 minyanim mitzumtzamim, it's fraught with difficulty. I'm talking about you have 40 people. I make 20 and 20. So Rav Moshe Yeridei Chel Simon Samach Aleph says, even if you have 40 people, and the both minyanim will not be mitzumtzim, it's not proper to divide a minyan. And he says, Pasha, If you daven in this shul, you could say Nefil Sapayim regularly. If you daven in the hallway, you can't say Nefil Sapayim. There's no Sefer Torah. More so, the Gemara gives a special haftacha to Kedushas Beis HaKnesses impacting davening. If you daven in the hallway, it's not Kedushas Beis HaKnesses. But then Moshe says, but let's say you have 2 Batei Midrashim and you have 2 shuls, but Lamaisi says you are still encroaching on K'vayid HaShechina. Because there's a Ma'ila based on Gemaras of Roivim Hadjas Melech. Zimun, you can't divide a big Zimun into small Zimun. Roivam. So Moshe says, who says because a person has a Chiyuv, he could divide a minyan and take away from K'vayid of the very Olam of Hadjas Melech. This is what Moshe says. I saw in a Sefer Siach Tfilas in Amud Tav Chav Beis, he has other problems. Typically, the people daven in the hallway and one minyan disturbs the other. You can't hear what's coming, what's going. Also, the Mispalim don't have a Makam Kavua, and they don't have Bichlal. They learn in one place, most of daven we learn. It's just a problem. But then he says what really was convincing, what he saw with his own eyes, there was once 28 people in the shul, and there were 3 chiyuvim. So people are very creative when it comes to an amid. So they had 9, 9, 9, and one fellow was in the middle, and he didn't start after all 3 of them. Now, this reminds me what I heard once, someone who came made a 2 minyanim, and it was a disaster. Someone asked him, "No, how many averis did you do to say Chanishmas your father today?" A shab, I wouldn't talk that way, but a good gesagt. We're out to make schusim, not choides. So to disturb people, to push people, to join a minyan in a basement, in a hall, upstairs, downstairs, even if it's done right, sometimes it's lacking. Now, I want to make a point also, what he says, and he says that the Chazal tell us, Ein adayim meruba oisin as a mitzvah ki yechidim. Eicha yerdeiv echad elef, ushnayim yanis revava. By the Rebbeinu Shalom's chusim grow exponentially. 20 is not 2 times 10. 20 is many more times 10, because that's the way it works. It grows. So he says, even if you have to switch off with another chiyuv, and what you daven mincha, he davens ma'ariv, and you daven 40 people with 1 minyan, you get more schusim in the davening once than davening 2 small minyanim. That's what he wants to say. Now, this is easier said than done. People like the Yomid. I want to mention that Rabbi Yashiv in Siyuni Halacha on Mitafai and Ches, B'Shem Shleima, Hey Aleph, they say that the schus of Kibbut of allows you to divide a minyan, but as they both stress, that's only if both minyanim will be done properly. In other words, to cut it into 2 minyanim of matzumtzum of 10, and you have to rely on all sorts of kulas, is a tzarachi and god. If you have 2 nice minyanim and a davening in Bati Midrashim, not in a hall, not outside, hanging out, from this way or that way. If it's done right, then there is a tzad to be makel to divide minyanim. That's taken a minig oilam. Let's just chazer over the kitzah. What you need for a minyan, 10 people. Some say the raisa, some say the rabbanon, but no one says rubik kule regarding the number 10. The question is, for tefillah b'tzibur, can we rely on shisha mispalalim? Some say you need 10, nothing less. Minig ha'olam is to rely on shisha mispalalim. 7 is a hiddur, but the ik is shish is also enough. And basically, it's not a new minig lahakol, and it's not a vilda chumra lahachmir. If there's what to be machmir, but in the ikar din, we rely on shisha mispalalim. If a person can wait for a better minyan or go to a full minyan, it's zichet better. But don't ruin a minyan of 6 that are relying on shisha mispalim, the schus of chesed, and it's not chalila chatei b'shvil sheyis chavercha. The start shmein esther v'shachar is the best idea is to have 10 people, but if 6 are ready to start, you're allowed to start tefillah b'tzibur. It's an achrayis on a participant of a minyan mitzumtzum to make it work l'chatchila, daven along, make sure that you're there. Because chazar zashatz, b'miyuchad you have to have 9 answering, and by the way, they have to listen and answer. To get someone to answer to be one of the 9 is okay. Ma'ariv, when possible, you should wait for the minyan to finish, but the halacha 6 is enough. If one of the teachers go to the bathroom, you can continue going. Chazaras hashatz, you could say if 6 didn't hear chazaras hashatz, b'diavad, even a cotton could be added. But laning is most chama, you need 10 people listening. If 6 miss laning, you can make another laning, and again, the 10 have to listen. Kaddish needs a minyan, but for the learning, or the ashrei, or the karbanis, you could be saimech that as long as they're at 10 now, and to make 2 minyanim, if it's done right, it's fine, but it shouldn't be done a b'di'evid. I can talk to you.
Go ahead, Rabbi Smith, for the wonderful items, and we started in those.